Welcome to Frontline Dispatches on Organizing Upgrade. We're a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice and much more. You can tune in for future episodes of Frontline Dispatches every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central, and 4 p.m. Pacific. My name is Gerald Lenoir, and I'll be today's host. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please leave comments and chats. We'll be monitoring those as the show goes on. And if you have any questions, we can entertain those. And if you haven't yet, give Organizing Upgrade a like and subscribe to this channel. And to stay up to speed on what the amazing content on Organizing Upgrade, you can sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, and articles about left strategy for organizers. So let's get started. My guest today is Jesse Hagopian, who is a co-founder of the National Black Lives Matters at School and also an ethnic studies teacher at Seattle Garfield High School. He's part of the Zen Education Project's Teach on the Black Struggle Project, and he's co-editor of Black Lives Matters in School and a number of other books. Welcome, Jesse.
Hey, thank you so much. And you forgot my most important descriptor. I'm your son.
Yeah, there you go. So welcome, my son.
You having me here, Pops.
I appreciate you coming on here. So let's get on with it then. Jesse, you know, you were one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matters at School, and you just finished a week of action that was a national project that was in several cities across the country. So talk about the origin of the network, its goals and activities for the week of action, and some of the work that you're doing at the national and local level.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, there's so many incredible educators and students and leaders that helped to launch this movement in Seattle and in Philly and New Jersey and all over the country. And I'm just really lucky to get to work with such a dedicated group of people who are working to transform public education to center Blackness. And last week's National Week of Action, our fourth National Week of Action, was just incredible. We tripled in size the numbers of communities registering in, saying that they were participating in Black Lives Matter at School Week. Incredible victory for us. We got the endorsement of the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, as well as the UFT that serves New York City. For the first time, you know, it took some persistence, but they endorsed Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action and joined the largest union in the country, the National Education Association, in doing so. And we actually got the state of California's legislature to endorse Black Lives Matter at School and our 4 demands. Incredible breakthrough. And it just blows my mind to think about how this started with one elementary school in Seattle, John Muir Elementary School, where some dedicated educators there wanted to let their students know back in 2016 that they were loved. This was right after the summer when Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were killed, and there's so much trauma that our students had gone through, and they wanted the students to know beginning in September that Blackness would be celebrated at their school. And the art teacher designed a shirt that said, "Black Lives Matter, we stand together." And Deshaun Jackson helped to bring in a group called Black Men United to change the narrative. And they organized with Black parents and the PTA, and they were going to have a big event out front of the school, high-fiving all the youth as they came in to school that day and holding a rally, an assembly on Black history. And then hateful white supremacists bombarded the school with hate mail, and then a particularly hateful individual made a bomb threat against an elementary school only because they wanted to celebrate their Black students. And that hurt my heart. My friend Wayne Al's son went to that school, and he put me in touch with the educators there. And we brought them to a meeting of the social equity educators, and we decided to pass a resolution in our union calling on October 19th of 2016 to be Black Lives Matter at School Day. And we said they could threaten one school, and the school district officially had to cancel their event because of that threat, but they couldn't threaten every school. And so we called on every educator to come to school wearing those shirts. And we partnered with the Black student unions and the NAACP and the PTA of Seattle. And we held press conferences and organized a t-shirt drive. And we sold over 2,000 t-shirts. And by the time the day came, some 3,000 educators came to school wearing those Black Lives Matter shirts in just an eruption of solidarity and struggle. And the educators in Philly saw what we had done, and they took it to a whole nother level. They took it from a day of action to a week of action, and they went to the Black Lives Matter Global Network's 13 points of unity, and they broke down those points into teaching points for each day of the week and based their curriculum on that. And the following year, we all got together from out of a conference, Free Minds, Free People, where it was really organized out of. And we got educators from several cities to come together and launch a national week of action. And I just want to end this question by saying that it's been incredible to see this movement really animated by the politics of Black, queer, anti-capitalist feminism that looks to center those who are most marginalized in the curriculum and in the struggle. And I'm grateful to my sister Okaikor in Black Lives Matter at School that has really helped to lead that charge amongst the leadership. And what we've seen in the aftermath of the uprising this summer, but also contributions from many organizations, including Black Lives Matter at School, is police being driven out of schools in city after city. So it started with Minneapolis driving the police out of schools, and St. Paul and Denver public schools and the Oakland public schools. And I'm proud to say that the Seattle public schools no longer have police in them anymore, terrorizing our Black and brown youth and using resources that should go to counselors, to trauma counseling, to nurses, to librarians, to all the things that will actually help support our youth.
So that was one of the 4 demands. What were the other demands?
Yeah, so our first demand is to end zero tolerance discipline and replace it with restorative justice, because we know that Black students are suspended at 4 times the rate of white students for the same infractions nationally. And actually Black girls are the most disproportionately suspended. That narrative of the angry Black girl gets slapped on them, and they're suspended at 7 times the rates of white girls. And the work of Monique Morris has really uncovered the harm that is causing in our schools. Our second demand is about hiring more Black teachers. We've lost 26,000 Black teachers in the United States since 2002, mostly because of corporate education reform policies that are closing schools in Black and brown neighborhoods. And we also know the studies that show graduation rates increasing dramatically when Black students have even one Black teacher in their K-12 career. And, our next demand is for ethnic studies and Black studies. And I'm really proud to say that because of some really talented organizers in Seattle, that demand was actualized, and people like Tracy Castro Gill and John Greenberg and Rita Green and many students came together, and they fought and won an ethnic studies department in Seattle that is now this year being expanded to have a separate and collaborating Black Studies department. And the first Black Studies course citywide is now started up in the Seattle public schools. And our final demand was to fund counselors and not cops. And that's because 14 million children in the US go to a school that has a police officer but is missing one of the following: a school psychologist, a counselor, a nurse, a librarian. And this is how we're trying to transform the schools.
Sounds like you're meeting with some level of success. Let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and what impact that has had. We know that it's exacerbated already existing educational disparities. Tell us what has been happening with educators, students, parents, and communities to address the pandemic and its impact on students.
No doubt. You know, the impact of remote schooling due to the pandemic on our most vulnerable students has been really profound. The impact on Black and brown students, on students living in poverty is hard to even comprehend. You know, at Garfield, where I teach, we have some 150 homeless kids at our school. This is in a city with Amazon and Boeing and Starbucks and Microsoft, right? When we got a crane on every corner, the city is glittering with gold, and yet we have hundreds and thousands of homeless students across the district. And these students rely on the schools for so much. They rely on in-person schooling for their meals, you know, for trauma counseling, for showers, for doing their laundry, for far more than just academics. And I think some cynical politicians have sought to exploit this harsh reality for Black and brown and working class and poor families by saying, that's why we need to rush to bring students back into the classroom. But actually, you know, the majority of Black families are saying they don't want to return until it's really, truly safe to return. And in places where they are trying to force kids back into school buildings before the conditions are safe, many Black families are voting with their feet and staying home and keeping their kids home and choosing to continue to learn remotely. And, you know, I can't really blame them. You know, I think that we need to make sure that our schools are safe before we bring them in. But, you know, there's this new narrative that's emerging that's really has a lot of historical antecedents and isn't so new, but we hear about the learning loss that's occurring right now and the crisis of learning loss. That means we have to rush educators and students back into the classroom. And this really came to a head in Chicago, where they recently had a showdown about whether they were going to bring students back. And Janice Jackson, the chief executive officer of the Chicago Public Schools, said, quote, "We cannot sit back and allow this generation to falter because of made up reasons around why we can't do reopening. But the safety of our children and of our educators is not made up reasons." And I really think that this narrative of learning loss is a racist narrative that we need to discard. And I want to actually just read for you the words of Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, the Princeton professor and author, when she said, "The dystopian imagery of a lost generation, quote unquote, of Black youth is redolent of earlier moral panics. The discoveries of quote unquote crack babies in the 1980s and the quote unquote super predators in the 90s were also rooted in anecdote-driven pseudoscientific evidence. Today's evidence for the spiral of Black children is the tactically vague measurement of quote unquote learning loss, but no one needs to invent a new metric to discover that during the worst crisis in modern American history, students might be falling behind." Of course, students are losing something, right, from not being an in-person learning, and the collaboration that we do in the classroom is so critical to deep learning. And so at the earliest moment that we can come back, I will be advocating for that. And yet we know that our students and our educators' lives are precious. And why wouldn't we rush to get our educators vaccinated before we send them back into the classroom? And I think we have to really grapple with the fact that a lot of our schools are not safe to return to. If you look at the conditions of the ventilation systems that are severely outdated, we need to have the well-being of our youth and educators at the forefront of the decision to re-enter school.
Yeah, this is an ongoing struggle that's happening in San Francisco right now, as you said, in Chicago, New York. Yep. The unions and the local and state governments are battling it out to figure out how to open the schools. So,
and they're trying to pit parents against teachers, right?
Yeah,
divide and conquer. And I think when we come together, when the unions use a social movement union approach, like we describe in our book, Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice, that's when we can really, I think, win the funds we would need to create safe classrooms, to bring the PPE, the COVID testing, the vaccination that we would need to make it safe.
Yeah. So I want to turn to another issue that you touched upon earlier, and that is corporate power and how it's shaping the curriculum of schools, and how corporations and philanthropic organizations are pressuring lawmakers and policymakers to privatize education. What is your take on that, and what is the organizing around that? How is that going?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there was really an eruption of corporate education reform that entered the public schools around the No Child Left Behind Act back in 2001 and 2, when I began teaching. And this is really being driven by several billionaires like Bill Gates, Eli Broad, the Walmart family, who are determined to use their wealth to figure out how to open up the piggy bank of the public schools and cash in on kids. And their agenda is to privatize education with charter schools, to bust teachers' unions, and really to inundate the schools with high-stakes standardized testing. And they want to really test our kids and test them again instead of nurturing our kids, right? And it just astounds me that that's their approach to education reform. I mean, we need COVID testing, not standardized testing, right? We don't have a nurse in every school in a city as rich as ours. The basic well-being of our students is not being taken care of. And, you know, I liken it to a situation of if you saw a kid shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia and you knew that they were going to perish quickly if something wasn't done. And what you did was go and take their temperature, and then you take it again and again. And the average student in the American public school system takes 112 high-stakes standardized tests in their K-12 career. So you're taking that temperature again and again and again and again. When are you going to wrap them in a blanket and give them the nurture and care that they need? And that's what we're saying. We want to wrap our kids in wraparound services, after school programs, tutoring programs, mentorship programs, healthcare programs that can really provide for the needs of our kids. And I think too often there's another racist narrative that's used to talk about Black youth, which is the achievement gap. And we hear this is the main way that Black kids are talked about in the mainstream debate about education. And it's always from this deficit model that endlessly repeats how many grade levels Black students are behind or how much lower their test scores are. And we hear an awful lot about this achievement gap. But what I want to suggest is that we actually need to reframe the discussion in the terms that Gloria Ladson-Billings uses to talk about the education debt and what is owed Black students, because
there you go.
Right?
There you go.
Right? I mean, A recent study came out that showed that students of color receive $23 billion less in education funding than predominantly white school districts. So there is an education debt, and Black Lives Matter at school is coming to collect that debt. And, you know, instead of us talking about the achievement gap and learning loss, we need to be talking about the immense talents that our Black youth have that are not valued in our society. So if we change the metric of what we think is important in education, and we say, instead of training kids to eliminate wrong answer choices on high stakes multiple choice tests, what if we said the purpose of education was to identify problems in our society and then to figure out collective solutions to those problems? Well, when I've redefined my own ethnic studies classroom in those terms, what I found is that all of a sudden my Black and brown students become experts in the class, and my white students have to catch up to learn about the impact of structural racism in our society and ideas about how to change it. And so, in fact, I think our Black students have a lot to teach the world and are achieving at extremely high levels when we reframe the purpose of education. And in fact, when you look at what happened this summer with what the Washington Post called the largest protests in the history of the United States, I think that our Black youth have become the great educators in this country when they wrote one of the greatest lesson plans I can ever imagine about taking to the streets, about linking arms, right? And solidarity. They taught this whole country a lesson about how to fight for social justice. And we need to see the immense talents of our Black youth and nurture and support them rather than label and shame them.
So you mentioned high stakes testing, standardized testing that's so prevalent in our schools. I know a few years ago you led a struggle to eliminate standardized testing. So talk about what that was like and what you achieved.
No doubt. That was one of the great joys of my life when all the educators at Garfield voted unanimously to refuse to give a high stakes standardized test called the MAP test. And, you know, there were some incredible educators like Mallory Clark, who really launched the whole struggle, who said, this test is not giving me any useful information. She's a reading teacher. And she said, you know what I do if I want to find out what grade level my kids are reading at? I have them read a book. And instead of labeling and shaming them with a test score, I have them read out loud. And then I can hear the specific problems in their reading and tailor my instruction to that. And when the entire faculty voted to refuse to give the test, the tested subject teachers were threatened with a 10-day suspension without pay by the school district. And then we had to organize, and we began building partnerships with the NAACP and the Black student unions. We did a lot of reading about the origins of high-stakes standardized testing being a product of the eugenics movement, the openly white supremacist movement that developed standardized testing, like Carl Brigham, who was one of the leaders of the eugenics movement, who created the SAT exam. And they grafted these tests on the public schools specifically to maintain white male power. And we did our research, we organized this campaign, and by the end of the school year, not only did they not fire a single one of the educators, but in fact, because of the mass solidarity that poured in from all over the country and even the world, they eliminated the MAP test altogether for Seattle's high school. It was just a resounding victory.
All right. So we're running out of time now, but I don't know if we have any questions from our audience. If not, I'm going to move to one of my last questions, which is, Jesse, we're now in a new Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration. And Biden has said he wants to get the majority of school open in the first 100 days of his administration. He has also said that he wants to increase funding for schools. Looking ahead for the next 4 years, what is the conversation and strategies going on within the education justice movement about what the goals of these 4 years are and how to move forward with education justice?
Yeah, I think to answer this question about what's possible right now with the new administration, we first have to put it in historical context, and we need to apply a people's history lens to this. So shout out to Howard Zinn and the Zinn Education Project, because we're always taught in school that it's powerful people, usually great white men, that create history and make whatever historical gains possible. And we're taught that Lincoln freed the slaves, when in fact Lincoln said, if I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And it was actually enslaved African people who deserted plantations en masse and joined the Union Army that won the Civil War, right? Or we're taught that FDR granted unemployment insurance and made it legal to unionize. And we're not talked about the general strikes in San Francisco and in Minneapolis and Toledo that shut down those cities, and the mass union movement that demanded these changes, right? And so the same will be true today. Whatever semblance of educational justice we achieve from the Biden-Harris administration will be because we organized and fought for it. And I think there's several priorities of this movement right now, because of, I think, the Bernie Sanders campaign putting forward the idea of tripling the funding to Title I schools that serve the poorest communities in America. Biden had said that he would do that too. So now it's time to hold his feet to the fire and make that happen, and continue to demand that, and unions to be ready to strike if that doesn't happen. And we have to push Biden to go far beyond what his agenda is for schools, because we need to demand that all student loan debt is canceled in America. It's outrageous that we're one of the few wealthy countries that makes kids mortgage their futures by spending tens of thousands of dollars on their higher education. And we also need to end the high-stakes standardized testing, especially right now in this era of COVID. And that's an immediate struggle that folks should go to fairtest.org and sign the petition to stop the high-stakes standardized testing this spring. What we're measuring is access to resources. In these tests, we're measuring your proximity to the dominant white culture. We're not measuring your aptitude, your intelligence, what you've learned at all, especially in this time of a pandemic. So those are some of the immediate struggles that we face right now, and that I know Black Lives Matter at School and the social justice union movement will be taking up in the months and years to come.
Well, good luck on that agenda, and thank you so much.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for blazing the trail in these struggles for racial justice your whole life and making it possible for me to be part of this movement.
Jesse Hagopian, besides being my son, is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter at School. He's part of the Zinn Education Projects, teaching the Black Struggle Project, and a teacher at Garfield High School in Seattle. Thanks again, Jesse.
Appreciate you, Pops.
To our audience, if you've enjoyed this video, stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade. Sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events and videos and articles about left strategy for organizers. Thanks again.